For most of human history, space was imagined as a silent backdrop, an empty stage where matter moved, stars burned, and time passed independently, untouched by what happened inside it. Space was where things existed, not something that existed itself. Time was a ticking backdrop, uniform and indifferent. Together, space-time felt passive, a container, not a participant. But modern physics quietly dismantled that picture, not with drama, but with a series of unsettling realizations that changed how reality itself is understood. Space-time, it turns out, is not empty, it is not inert, it does not merely host the universe, it behaves. When Einstein introduced general relativity, he did something subtle and revolutionary. He removed gravity as a force acting within space and instead revealed it as the behavior of space itself. Mass and energy do not simply move through space-time. They bend it, stretch it, warp it. Space-time responds. It curves in reaction to matter, and that curvature tells matter how to move in return. This is not a static relationship, it is feedback, a continuous dialogue between geometry and energy, where space-time is not a passive grid, but an active participant in cosmic events. This alone begins to blur a boundary. In everyday thinking, environments are separate from the things that occupy them. A room does not change because you walk through it. A void does not react when matter passes through. But space-time does. It responds to presence. It reshapes itself. And this reshaping is not symbolic or abstract. It is measurable. Light bends, time slows, orbits shift. Clocks tick at different rates depending on where they are and how fast they move. Space-time is sensitive. Sensitivity is not life. But it is not nothing either. Then comes the expansion of the universe, another quiet disturbance to the idea of emptiness. Space itself is growing, not objects moving apart through space, but the fabric between them stretching. Every second, every moment, space-time is doing something. Galaxies drift apart not because they are fleeing, but because the geometry connecting them is evolving. This expansion is not happening in space, it is space. Which means space-time has a history. It has changed, it continues to change, and it will change again. Change is the first sign that a system is dynamic rather than static. Empty space, in classical thinking, should do nothing. But in quantum physics, even the vacuum is restless. Fields fluctuate. Virtual particles appear and vanish. Energy is never exactly zero. The lowest possible state still churns with activity. Nothing turns out to be a seething background of possibility, governed by rules, constraints, and behaviors. Space-time, at its most minimal state, is not still. It vibrates with potential. And once again, the boundary softens. If space-time were truly just a backdrop, it would be unaffected by what happens inside it. But everything we observe suggests the opposite. Space-time reacts. It evolves. It carries imprints of past events. When massive objects collide, they send gravitational waves rippling through space-time itself. Distortions that travel outward, stretching and compressing the fabric of reality. These ripples pass through planets, stars, and even your body, imperceptibly small but real. Space-time remembers events long after the objects involved are gone. Memory is not consciousness, but it is persistence. When physicists speak of space-time today, they no longer describe it as a void, they describe it as a field. A structure with properties, a medium that can be excited, distorted and influenced, something that has limits, behaviors and responses. And this reframing opens an uncomfortable question, not a mystical one, but a structural one. At what point does an active system stop being just a stage and start being something more? Living systems, after all, are not defined by biology alone. They are defined by patterns of behavior. Responsiveness, adaptation, organization. A hurricane is not alive, but it has structure, feedback loops, and persistence. A river system is not conscious, but it responds to terrain, reorganizes over time, and shapes its environment. An ecosystem regulates itself without central control. None of these things are alive in the human sense, but they blur the simplicity of the word dead. Space-time behaves more like these systems than like an empty box. It is structured. It has geometry. It reacts to inputs. It evolves over time. It exhibits large-scale patterns emerging from fundamental rules. It supports complexity. And crucially, it does all of this without intention. Lifelike behavior does not require purpose. It requires process. And space-time is nothing if not a process. This does not mean space-time is alive in the way organisms are alive. It does not metabolize. It does not reproduce. It does not have desires. But asking whether space-time is alive may be the wrong question. A better one might be, is space-time inactive? And the answer increasingly seems to be no. The language we use, fabric, curvature, expansion, already hints at this. We speak of space-time stretching, relaxing, responding. These are metaphors, yes, but they point to something deeper. Space-time has behavior. And behavior implies rules unfolding over time. If space-time were merely a passive arena, it would not care whether matter existed or not. But remove matter, and space-time still expands. Remove energy, and quantum fluctuations persist. Remove structure, and geometry still has properties. Space-time does not vanish when emptied. It continues. Which suggests that space-time is not something that merely contains reality. It is part of reality's machinery. And perhaps more than that, consider this: every process you know, thought, motion, decay, growth, occurs within space-time, but space-time itself is what allows processes to exist at all. It defines distance, duration, causality. Without space-time, nothing can happen. Not because nothing exists, but because existence itself requires a framework for change. Space-time is not an accessory to reality. It is the condition that allows reality to unfold. This gives space-time a role that is uncomfortably close to foundational. And once something is foundational, it becomes difficult to treat it as dead. Dead things are consequences. They do not generate conditions. They do not shape possibility. Space-time does. It dictates what kinds of structures can exist. It limits how fast information can travel. It governs what can influence what. It sets the stage for complexity, but also constrains it. In this sense, space-time behaves less like an empty container and more like a regulatory system, a framework with rules that guide evolution. And within this framework, life arises, not as an intrusion, but as a continuation. This is where the idea becomes quietly unsettling. If space-time is active, structured, responsive, and evolving, then life may not be something that appears inside an otherwise dead universe. Life may be one of the ways space-time expresses its dynamics locally, not intentionally, not inevitably, but naturally, given the rules. From this view, atoms organizing into molecules, molecules into cells, cells into brains, and brains into awareness are not violations of a lifeless background. They are patterns permitted, even encouraged, by space-time structure. Energy flows along gradients, information accumulates, feedback loops stabilize, complexity blooms where conditions allow, and all of this happens within space-time, not on top of it. Which means space-time is not just the environment of life, it is the medium through which life becomes possible. This reframes the universe in a subtle but profound way. Instead of imagining ourselves as conscious beings wandering through a cold, indifferent void, we begin to see ourselves as patterns arising within an active cosmic process, not separate from it, not opposed to it, but shaped by the same rules that shape stars, galaxies, and the expansion of space itself. Space-time does not need to be alive in order to behave in ways that resemble life. It only needs to be dynamic, and everything we observe suggests that it is. The universe is not a frozen stage. It is moving, and where movement exists, structure can form. Where structure forms, complexity can arise, and where complexity arises, awareness becomes possible. This does not mean space-time knows you, but it does mean you are not standing on something dead. You are standing inside a process that has been unfolding for billions of years, a process that bends, stretches, remembers, and evolves. And this is only the beginning of the question.